LiberalViewer presents.
So welcome to the June 25th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I picked out the weekend's 18 best, most newsworthy clips for what should be a really educational, fair use media criticism and political analysis show for you all tonight. I'll start with a little political comedy from Real Time with Bill Maher, the monologue from last Friday, but as usual, my clips come mostly from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. You can see the three topics I'm covering, mostly Trumpcare, a little bit on Russia, and then a voting rights clip bonus at the end from MSNBC's AM Joy and an ACLU voting rights attorney, Dale Ho. That'll be at the end. So those are the three topics. And if you're watching as a recorded show, I'll put time indexes down in the video description so you can click between the topics at your leisure. I've also put a link down there to my clip list of the 18 clips I'm using, so you can click down on that link and look at my clip list and try to decipher my notes, and you should at least be able to tell what the topic is and who's talking and generally what they're saying, but maybe not. It's up to you. Anyway, like I said, the three topics I'm covering start with Trumpcare as the big topic because the Trumpcare bill in the Senate, the meaner Trumpcare bill, was revealed this last week, and then they're supposedly going to vote on it before July 4th. Basically, I think they're supposed to vote on it next Thursday if it doesn't get delayed, although there are several problems with it, which I will discuss and show news clips on, but I want to start with the way that Bill Maher made fun of Trumpcare in his monologue, and he picked out the three big issues, I think, which I will discuss with you after we watch that clip together. It's about 2 minutes long from Bill Maher's monologue. You can watch the full monologue for free on YouTube at a link I've also put down in the video description. Here's the 2 minutes I picked out for you.
And you know, everybody's saying it was unveiled. Unveiled is not the right term. You unveil a sculpture. Nobody goes, behold a turd. It's just more like something that was excreted. I mean, healthcare bill, more like a manifesto from the Zodiac Killer. They should have published this by cutting out letters from the newspaper. It phases out Medicaid, the safety net for our oldest, poorest, and most vulnerable citizens. It lets states drop the Obamacare protections like pre-existing conditions, and just for spite, it defunds Planned Parenthood. No more gynecological exams, although Trump says he is still available to grab pussies. Of course, I'm being one-sided and leaving out the good part. There's a massive tax cut for the top 1%. Yes, the guiding principle is, rich people, if you like your money, you can keep your money. And even still, I love this, a small group of thank you, one person. A small group of Republican senators say they can't vote for it because it's not mean enough. A group led by, not surprisingly, Ted Cruz, who has been studying health care from top to bottom, up and down. Ted says, who knows more about making people sick than I do? But do not kid yourself. This will pass. Republicans get shit done. Mitch McConnell says he wants a vote before the 4th of July, when Trump voters traditionally blow their hands off.
So those were the jokes in Bill Maher's monologue. I was trying to think, what were the three things that he satirized there that end up in the news programs? I mean, there are definitely two. The two big issues are the cuts in Medicaid, and I'll show several clips on that. It's basically $800 billion, or, you know, it's coming up to $1 trillion in cuts in Medicaid, which also it's like 600, or I think it's $600 billion in tax cuts, mostly to the very wealthy. So bad for the poor, good for the rich, and then also just mean. It's the meanness and the secretness and the the speed, and you'll see people talking about delay. So all those things came up in just the jokes in Bill Maher's monologue. But I want to compare a few different news reports on this. The first one's from NBC's Meet the Press, where they actually covered Trumpcare, and they covered Russia, and they even covered the loss of the Democrats in the 6th Congressional District in Georgia, where John Ossoff lost to Karen Handel, and that was like 4 in a row that the Democrats have lost in special elections. We're not really going to cover that very much, although I may talk about it a little bit at the end when I showed this voting rights clip. But Chuck Todd and NBC's Meet the Press covered all of it, and they put it in this context of America more divided than ever, and that sort of is the context for what's going on with healthcare, which I will discuss with you after we watch that 4-minute news report from NBC's Meet the Press this morning over here.
Our political cultures, one left, one right, one blue, one red, one liberal, one conservative. From the special congressional election in Georgia to debate over health care to the Russia investigation and even to the shooting at that Republican baseball practice, Americans watched their favorite cable channels, clicked on their top news sites, and spoke and listened primarily to those who already agreed with them. Our NBC News Wall Street Journal poll bears this out this week. 38% gave President Trump a positive rating. 38% believe the economy has improved and that the president deserves the credit. 38% believe Obamacare is a bad idea, and 38% want efforts to repeal and replace Obamacare to continue. Do you notice a pattern? That 38% largely packed into Republican districts may be just enough to push the Republican health care plan and President Trump's priorities over the line. And it's just another data point that illustrates why these days, to many voters, it may be less satisfying to win than to see the other side lose.
I'll tell you about the Democrats. I am making it a little bit hard to get their support, but who cares?
Americans' distrust in institutions is becoming an old story. But now the most basic institution is crumbling. The trust Americans have in each other.
The Democrats are making the divide. Instead of working together, they're fighting.
The Republicans are, honestly, they're looking out for their interests.
The Democrats are so nasty. It bothers me that we're so separated as a nation.
The right and the left don't just disagree on solutions. They can't agree on fundamental facts.
We elected Trump. We have to take what he says and believe what he says.
Just 26% of Republicans say they believe Russia interfered in the presidential election, compared with 78% of Democrats and 53% of independents.
They have phony witch hunts going against me. They have everything going. And you know what? All we do is win, win, win.
Washington has been captured by these tribal tendencies, producing a healthcare debate which is less debate and more all-out rhetorical brawl.
These cuts are blood money. People will die.
You know what blood money is? Blood money is the money Democrats are raising since the recent attempted massacre of those Republicans at the baseball practice.
On Friday, Hillary Clinton tweeted, "Forget death panels. If Republicans pass this bill, they're the death party." The hardening polarization of Congress has led to a process where health care legislation has been crafted by one party in secret over just 52 days. Even some Senate Republicans acknowledge this is no way to govern.
I think it's being written by someone somewhere, but I'm not aware of who or where.
We used to complain like hell when the Democrats ran the Affordable Care Act. Now they're doing the same thing.
A long list of health care advocacy groups oppose this bill, which would slash Medicaid spending in part by putting caps on how much federal money states can receive. All of that despite candidate Trump's campaign promises.
I'm not going to cut Medicare or Medicaid. Every other Republican's going to cut.
The Senate bill would also deliver roughly $1 trillion in tax cuts over 10 years. And it would allow states to drop many of the benefits required by Obamacare, like maternity care, emergency services, and mental health treatment. In the end, Senate Republicans are speaking to a single audience, the 38% of voters who make up the president's base.
I think they should vote for the health care bill and then make changes to it as they can, because Obama's bill is dead.
We've identified 8 Republican senators whose vote is currently in question as the health care vote draws near. 4 from the moderate end of things: Susan Collins, Dean Heller, Lisa Murkowski, and Cory Gardner. And 4 conservatives: Rand Paul, Mike Lee, Ron Johnson, and Ted Cruz. And Senator Ron Johnson.
And Senator Ron Johnson is going to be on NBC's Meet the Press, and I'll show a clip from him as well as a clip from Senator Rand Paul on the conservative side criticizing Trumpcare, and then I'll also have a clip of Senator Susan Collins criticizing Trumpcare from the more moderate Republican side, as well as Chuck Schumer and the Senate Minority Leader and Senator Bernie Sanders, who will be criticizing Trumpcare from the Democratic perspective. But that ABC News report I thought was fairly good at creating context, but was a little light on the real devastating effects of what has been proposed in the Senate, and it's mostly like what's been proposed in the House. And that's kind of one of the reasons I think that the news reports have been a little light on the devastating effects of the Senate bill is the CBO score doesn't come out until it's supposed to come out tomorrow, Monday. Maybe it's come out by the time you're watching this video, and you'll see ABC in the next news report I'm going to show George Stephanopoulos on this week. He starts off where he talks about how the Republicans have been trying to do this for 7 years, and then he talks about the CBO score for the House bill rather than the Senate bill, because they're fairly similar, and there is a CBO score for the House bill. So that's how ABC gets into the specifics that NBC left out. And then they also talk about the meanness of the bill, both from President Obama and then President Trump, kind of owning the word meanness, as you'll see by the end of this news report. It's about half as long as the NBC one. This is the ABC clip from George Stephanopoulos, This Week with George Stephanopoulos this morning here.
Years in, the GOP effort to repeal Obamacare faces its biggest test yet this week. It's make or break for President Trump and Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell. He unveiled the bill Thursday after weeks of secret talks. The Congressional Budget Office has not weighed in yet with its take on the bill's impact, but we know it follows the basic outline of the legislation passed by the House in May. Repeal of the Obamacare taxes. Those benefits flow largely to the wealthiest Americans, paid for by massive cuts, more than $800 billion in the Medicaid public insurance program, which covers 1 in 5 Americans, 40% of poor adults. It also does away with the Obamacare requirement that people buy health insurance, allows states to opt out of the essential health benefits covered by Obamacare, like maternity care and treatment for addiction and mental health. That, combined with a provision that allows insurance companies to charge older Americans more for their coverage, creates a pretty clear divide. Younger, healthier Americans likely to pay less for coverage. Older, sicker Americans will pay more. Already, at least 5 GOP senators say they can't support the legislation. The bill fails if more than 2 vote no, which means a lot of horse trading ahead. Former President Obama weighed in from retirement. Simply put, he said, if there's a chance you might get sick, get old, or start a family, this bill will do you harm. And small tweaks over the course of the next couple weeks, under the guise of making these bills easier to stomach, cannot change the fundamental meanness at the core of this legislation. On Fox this morning, President Trump conceded that his task is tough.
They actually used my term, mean. That was my term, because I want to see, and I speak from the heart. That's what I want to see. I want to see a bill with heart. Healthcare is a very complicated subject from the standpoint that you move it this way and this group doesn't like it. You move it a little bit over here. You have a very narrow path.
And with that, let's bring in the counselor to the president.
Ooh, Kellyanne Conway. Did you see that? Kellyanne Conway was on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, and I have 2 clips from her. The clip after next is going to be Kellyanne Conway trying to justify the Medicare cuts as not being cuts, and then I'll have her in the second to last clip on the Russia. This will be on the Russia topic. She'll be talking about whether President Trump was being dishonest or misleading, or why did he say that there were possibly tapes of Comey, and doesn't he, in his latest response as to there not being tapes, but maybe there were tapes and that's why he didn't know, George Stephanopoulos really sticks her on that. But that'll be the second to last clip. Before I get to the Kellyanne Conway clip on Medicaid cuts, though, I want to compare the NBC news report that I showed before and then that last clip from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos to an even shorter clip from CNN's State of the Union. Dana Bash was substituting for Jake Tapper, but she still started the program with, what is the State of the Union? Well, it's mean, because that's the word that both President Obama, you saw in that last clip, and then President Trump reportedly used about the House bill, and then on Fox and Friends, he owned the word mean. He said it was mean, and that's part of how CNN sums up what's going on with healthcare. I don't think CNN does as good a job of analyzing the real negative effects of Trumpcare and its Senate version, which I will discuss with you after we watch that 95-second clip from CNN's State of the Union, guest hosted by Dana Bash this morning here.
Where the State of our Union is mean, that's the word Democrats have seized on to describe the Republican health care plan after President Trump reportedly used it himself in a closed-door session. This morning, he owned it.
Mean, that was my term, because I want to see, and I speak from the heart. That's what I want to see. I want to see a bill with heart. Healthcare is a very complicated subject from the standpoint that you move it this way and this group doesn't like it. You move it a little bit over here. You have a very narrow path. And honestly, nobody can be totally happy, even without the votes. Forget about votes. This has nothing to do with votes. This has to do with picking a plan that everybody's going to like. I'd like to say love, but like. But we have a very good plan. We have a few people that are, I think you could say modestly, they're not standing on the rooftops and screaming. They want to get some points. I think they'll get some points.
The president can only afford to lose 2 Republican senators for the Obamacare repeal bill to pass, and so far, 5 GOP senators have come out against the bill. 4 think it doesn't go far enough to repeal Obamacare, while 1 says too many Americans will lose their coverage under the new plan. Still, it's negotiable, and President Trump says he's cautiously optimistic.
I don't think they're that far off. I don't think they're that far off. You know, famous last words, right? But I think we're going to get there.
I'm joined by Dr.
And I'll show a couple clips of that was Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price, who appeared on multiple shows, and I'll have a couple clips of him later on the 2 big issues, one of which is the $800 billion cuts in Medicaid, and then another is the big tax cuts for the rich of about that same amount, a little bit under. I think it's $600 billion. But before I get to any Tom Price clips from as Secretary of Health and Human Services talking for the Trump administration, I want to get to the clip I promised, the return of Kellyanne Conway. She has not been on the Sunday morning shows for many, many weeks, but this morning she appeared on This Week with George Stephanopoulos and tried to argue that Medicaid cuts aren't cuts, they're just decreases in the amount of growth, even though they're going to be real cuts in services to real people, which I think George Stephanopoulos did a good job of trying to point out. And this clip is fairly long. It's, I think, 4 minutes, 5 seconds. But this is not classic Kellyanne Conway, because her talking points aren't really changing the subject. It's more spin that's trying to obfuscate what's going on. I guess that's kind of what Kellyanne Conway does. But the Russia clip, the second to last clip I'm going to show, is much more classic Kellyanne Conway, where she like changes the subject with all these red herrings, and by the end the questioner can't even remember what the question was. That's not so much the case here, and George Stephanopoulos does a pretty good job of pointing out that she's not really answering the question in this clip.
With Obamacare, a lot of senators have questions about the Senate bill, particularly those cuts in Medicaid, more than $800 billion. I want to show the president's first speech when he announced for president.
Save Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security without cuts. Have to do it.
The president right there said no cuts in Medicaid, had several tweets on that same subject. This bill has even more Medicaid cuts than the House bill. Why is the president going back on his promise?
These are not cuts to Medicaid, George. This slows the rate for the future, and it allows governors more flexibility with Medicaid dollars because they're closest to the people in need. Medicaid's imperative, its founding was meant to help the poor, the sick, the needy, the disabled, children, some elderly, women, particularly pregnant women. We are trying to get Medicaid back to its original moorings.
Kellyanne, I don't see how you can say that the more than $800 billion in savings is not cuts. And you don't have to take my word for it. It's the Republican senators you're facing right now who have that problem, led by Senator Dean Heller in Nevada. He said he's voting no. Also, Senator Susan Collins. Here's what they said.
First, it doesn't protect Nevadans on Medicaid. Second, the cuts to Medicaid threatens critical services in Nevada, services that a lot of Nevadans depend on.
I cannot support a bill that's going to make such deep cuts in Medicaid that it's going to shift billions of dollars of costs to our state governments.
So these senators are the ones saying these are Medicaid cuts. Is the president prepared to put more money back into Medicaid?
The president is prepared to have a conversation, a discussion, and a negotiation with those senators and others. I would point out that for the few who say that they're currently no, you're talking about 45 or more who are currently yeses. So that tells you something.
You don't have 45 yeses, Kellyanne. There are several of those senators are not yeses. They're saying they're waiting to see what the Congressional Budget Office says, and they have not come out and said they're going to support the bill.
Well, we also heard the House bill was never going to pass. We heard this guy can never get elected. We're very confident that the Senate bill will get through and that we're going to have health care reform that literally takes away these draconian Obamacare taxes on medical devices, prescription drugs. But let me get back to Medicaid for a second, because I can't just let it sit there unanswered, George. If you are currently in Medicaid, if you became a Medicaid recipient through the Obamacare expansion, you are grandfathered in. We're talking about in the future. You know, Obamacare took Medicaid, which was designed to help the poor, the needy, the elderly, the sick, disabled, also children and pregnant women. It took it and it went way above the poverty line and opened it up to many able-bodied Americans who should probably should at least see if there are other options for them. If they're able-bodied and they want to work, then they'll have employer-sponsored benefits like you and I do.
Kellyanne, hold on a second. There's no way you can say that a 15-year-old on Medicaid today is not going to be affected by the cuts in the future. Well, you said everybody who's on Medicaid now is grandfathered in and is not going to face any cuts, and that simply is not factual if you have more than $800 billion in cuts. It also
you
raises
keep calling them cuts, but we don't see them as cuts. It's slowing the rate of growth in the future and getting Medicaid back to where it was. Obamacare expanded the pool of Medicaid recipients beyond its original intentions. And George, you have to look at the whole health care bill, 142 pages in totem here, to have a full conversation. When you get rid of these penalties, these taxes, when you open up the market, when you stop the insurers from leaving and just hemorrhaging out of the exchanges, you had 83 leave the markets last year, 24 more. That'll be over 100 by next year. They think Obamacare is a bad deal, as do the 20 million who opted out, 6.5 million who went and paid a penalty rather than get this great thing called Obamacare.
Again, it's the Republican senators calling this cuts. It's the experts calling this cuts. There's no way you can say $800 billion in savings are not cuts. But I don't want to dwell on that because there are other important issues we have to focus on here as well. The president has made a big effort.
So that's as far as George Stephanopoulos went. He spent, like I said, about 4 minutes trying to get Kellyanne Conway to admit that cutting $800 billion out of Medicare is a cut, even though it increases the amount, but it doesn't increase it by the amount that the medical expenses. There's the medical CPI and then just the regular CPI, none of which actually account for the growth in expenses for real medical care, you know, especially with the growth in premiums and I don't know, that it's really going to be a cut in services, even if it's a growth in spending by a small amount that doesn't really account for the growth in expenses. And just to point out how true that is, I'm going to show a Republican senator. This is Susan Collins from the left, or I mean to the extent that Republican Party goes to the left. Senator Susan Collins from Maine is one of the possible senators who, on the Republican side, who might be stopping this from happening. And I'm going to cut out the part where she talked about how the defunding of Planned Parenthood might be enough to stop her from voting for this bill, but the Medicaid cuts are definitely a problem for her, and she doesn't buy Kellyanne Conway's explanation, as George Stephanopoulos gets her to say later in the program from that last clip you watched. This is about 3 minutes long, and it shows the moderate Republicans and maybe several moderate Republicans up to 7 or 8, according to Susan Collins, who might oppose this bill from the left, such as it exists in the Republican Party in this clip.
I'm very concerned about the cost of insurance for older people with serious chronic illnesses and the impact of the Medicaid cuts on our state governments, the most vulnerable people in our society, and healthcare providers such as our rural hospitals and nursing homes, most of whom are very dependent on the Medicaid program. So threading that needle is going to be extremely difficult.
You just heard Kellyanne Conway say, though, that those are not Medicaid cuts. What's your response to that?
Well, I respectfully disagree with her analysis, but this is why we need the Congressional Budget Office assessment of the impact of the Senate bill on costs and coverage, including its analysis of Medicaid, and that will be coming out tomorrow. But based on what I've seen, given the inflation rate that would be applied in the outer years to the Medicaid program, the Senate bill is going to have more impact on the Medicaid program than even the House bill.
So that means if that's true and if that is confirmed by the Congressional Budget Office, you're a no?
I want to wait to see the CBO analysis, but I have very serious concerns about the bill.
How many more senators do you believe share your views on Medicaid?
Well, there are several of us who have been meeting under the leadership of Senator Rob Portman to look at the Medicaid provisions. And there are about 7 to 8 people in that group. I can't speak for them, but suffice it to say that they are certainly concerned. And that's why the CBO analysis quantifying the cuts and the impact is going to be so important. You can't take over $800 billion out of the Medicaid program and not expect that it's going to have an impact on a rural nursing home that relies on Medicaid for 70% of the costs of its patients. So this is an access issue as well as one having to do with cost.
Does the bill pass this week?
It's hard for me to see the bill passing this week, but that's up to the majority leader. We could well be in all night, a couple of nights, working through what will be an open amendment process, and I think that at least is good. The process could have been a lot better. I would have liked to have seen the Democrats step up to the table and negotiate with us now, not wait till this bill is either passed or defeated.
Senator Collins, thanks for your time this morning.
So that's one of the Republican senators, more moderate, who is worried about Medicaid cuts, who is attacking or criticizing Trumpcare Senate version as too mean from the left, such as it is. Now, that whole Medicaid cut question was dealt with on Fox News Sunday with guest host Brit Hume in kind of a more ridiculous way. First, they had Senator John Barrasso, one of the architects, one of the members of the secret committee that created this Senate healthcare Trumpcare bill. He starts talking about how, we're going to do more with the same amount of money, while not really. Brit Hume never points out to him that it's actually $800 billion less. It's not the same amount of money. And then when Brit Hume switches over to Dick Durbin, the Democrat, in the discussion, he uses this tired old argument about how are we going to, aren't these entitlements going to bankrupt the country with, and Dick Durbin, to his discredit, never points out the fact that, well, there were all these taxes that paid for this entitlement. It didn't add to the deficit at all. And then by repealing all these entitlements, they're just giving a big tax cut to the rich. That, of course, didn't come up on Fox News Sunday in this final clip on the Medicaid cuts that I want to show you over here.
I'm a doctor who took care of every Medicaid patient that there was that came to me in Casper, Wyoming. As a state legislator, I always believed we could do a much better job if we could just have control of that money and actually help more people with the same amount of money without all the Washington.
You mean local
mandates.
control?
Local control, which is what I saw in the Wyoming State Senate. But the amount of dollars going to Medicaid from today on out continues to go up year after year after year. So when Senator Durbin refers to a cut, only in Washington is giving more each year, something you could see of a cut if it doesn't go up as fast as he would like it to go up. It goes up every year.
Let me turn back to you, Senator Durbin. There is a question about the growth in Medicaid spending and the fact that our budget problems are driven in huge part by the kind of entitlement program that Medicaid represents. And with its exponential growth, aren't we in a situation where something has to be done to curb the growth of Medicaid and perhaps other entitlement programs?
Brett, let me tell you, my friend John Barrasso, and he is my friend, spends a lot of time, we talk about Wyoming. Over the weekend, the head of the Wyoming Hospital Association came out against Senator Barrasso's bill, and the CEO of the Wyoming Medical Center said it's going to hurt everybody in Wyoming. Now, that's what's being said in his home state as he
She
tours
also
these
said she didn't read the
Let me say a
bill.
word.
She also said she didn't read the bill. So she could read it
Well,
first.
because it's impossible to find, you couldn't find the bill until
Only-
the very last
only
minute.
150
And
pages.
most of it is tax cuts.
Senator,
But I
let
want
me,
to say,
let me get back to my question
if I could
about.
respond on Medicaid.
Yeah, go ahead.
May I please?
Sure.
And I might say that the Republican governor of Wyoming would like to expand Medicaid, but the legislature won't let him. And the reason we need to expand it is to make sure that people who are currently working hard in low-paying jobs and have no medical benefits have an opportunity through Medicaid to have insurance for their families. Why do we have this increase, this dramatic increase in people on Medicaid? Because so many people are working hard every single day and don't have health insurance. Medicaid is their ticket to health insurance. And the Republicans have decided to put a cap on the amount of money that's going to be given to states, and Republican governors like the governor of Nevada, the governor of Ohio, the governor of Illinois have said this is a disaster for our states if you do it.
Senator, nowhere though in your answer in your comments do I hear an answer to the question of, is not Medicaid expanding at an unsustainable rate, and does not something have to be done for budgetary reasons, long-term and short, to curb the growth of this program and others like it?
Brett, let me tell you what is expanding at an unsustainable rate, and that is the notion that people would not have health insurance under this Republican approach. Let's face the reality. Even if you don't have Medicaid, even if the Republicans are successful in cutting back on it, people get sick and go to the hospital. In a state like Kentucky, one of the largest expansions of Medicaid, if they eliminate the Medicaid funding, it'll be a 165% increase in Kentucky in uncompensated care. There's going to be medical care given to these people, the working poor and those who are struggling, and others will have to pay for it. The Republicans won't face that reality.
Senator Barrasso?
Well, Medicaid was...
So I think that was enough of the Brit Hume interview, because Brit Hume was pretty much a tired old Republican argument that had very little relevance to the specific issues of this bill. It's just like, well, aren't entitlements going to bankrupt the country if we don't stop the poor people from getting too many benefits? That's, I mean, it's almost like, hey, you kids, get off of my lawn at this point from Brit Hume. I don't know, you can tell me what you think, but I didn't think that was the most incisive cross-examination from Brit Hume, and I didn't think Dick Durbin's answer was, he kind of dodged the question instead of pointing out to Brit Hume that, hey, there were all these taxes in Obamacare that actually paid for this entitlement, and now that they're cutting all these benefits to the poor and up to 125% of the poverty level for Medicaid expansion, they're just giving this big payout to the rich through this big tax cut. I don't know, something just fell. Big tax cut to the rich for cuts to the poor, and Dick Durbin didn't make that point, but the next clips I want to show are attacks on the Trumpcare bill in the Senate from the right, and I was reading the live comments along the way. I saw this one from NO8549 here. Let's see what... I don't know if you could read that, but many of the Republicans not on board think it needs to be more draconian, or actually needs to be meaner, that Trumpcare is not mean enough. And one of the people attacking Trumpcare from the right is Senator Rand Paul, and he was on This Week with George Stephanopoulos, and he made pretty clear that he wants there to be less subsidies, less help to people to get health insurance, and then less mandates on insurance companies that tell them that you can't sell like bogus health insurance that doesn't really cover people. So he wants to get rid of all that. That's what's basically making it meaner, as I will discuss with you after we watch that clip. George Stephanopoulos questioning Rand Paul on just what he needs to get to a yes vote over in this clip.
Obamacare was that it added regulations to insurance, mandates, which made insurance more expensive, but then it also told individuals, you know what, if you don't want to buy it now, you can wait and buy it after you're sick. That still remains. 10 of 12 regulations that add cost to insurance remain under the Republican bill, and we still say you can still buy insurance after you're sick. If you add those two together, you still get the death spiral. The Republican plan acknowledges that we're going to still have this death spiral, which is sicker and sicker people in the individual market, and the healthy people don't buy insurance. They acknowledge this by putting over $100 billion of insurance bailout money to try to say, oh, we're going to tamp down prices. We're not going to fix the problem. We're going to acknowledge the problem will continue forever, and we're just going to pile taxpayer money into it. That is just not a conservative notion to add a new federal program to bail out insurance companies.
That sounds like a fundamental structural flaw in the program that you're talking about. So is there no way you can get to a yes vote?
Well, what we can do is, if they cannot get 50 votes, if they get to impasse, I've been telling leadership for months now that I will vote for a repeal, and it doesn't have to be 100% repeal. So, for example, I'm for 100% repeal. That's what I want. But if you offer me 90% repeal, I'd probably vote for it. I might vote for 80% repeal.
What percent is it now?
Realize that just 1 second. Realize that the Obamacare subsidies in this bill are actually greater under the Republican bill than they are under the current Obamacare law. That is not anywhere close to repeal.
So you're a no right now. You're a no.
At this point, but I could vote if we get to impasse, if we go to a bill that is more repeal and less big government programs, yes, I'll consider partial repeal.
So that means fewer subsidies, lower subsidies?
It means more freedom. It means they have to legalize the sale of inexpensive insurance. Obamacare made it illegal to buy inexpensive insurance. If I have a 27-year-old guy and I don't want pregnancy coverage, I cannot buy an inexpensive policy. They price me out of the marketplace, and therefore I don't buy it at all, and that leads to the whole death spiral of Obamacare. All of that remains under this, and I'm not voting for something that looks just like Obamacare and still doesn't fix the fundamental flaw of Obamacare.
Your colleague Mike Lee also says he's...
So that was basically the Republican from the right, Senator Rand Paul, who represents several Republicans attacking Trumpcare, the Senate version, from the right, although there is this theory I've seen it's almost the conventional wisdom on the left that it's sort of a feint that they're going to get what they want and they're going to end up voting for the bill. And you heard Bill Maher in the first clip in his monologue say, Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, he knows what he's doing. He's going to get this passed. And maybe it's possible. It's really hard to tell. Well, I guess we're going to find out on Thursday. But you heard Rand Paul raise real objections. And in this next clip, the representative of the Trump administration, Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price, in his reaction to what the senators on the right are saying, this is from Fox News Sunday. Brit Hume, I think, does a much better job of cross-examining the Trump administration from the right than he did dealing with Dick Durbin and John Barrasso from the Senate about the Medicaid cuts. There he was like stuck on some old argument from 20 years ago, as I pointed out before. But here you can see that Tom Price has a difficult problem answering Rand Paul's concerns. Instead of talking about decreasing the subsidies and the mandate and the pre-existing condition problem that Rand Paul was talking about, instead he just talks about these are all the things that are not Obamacare in the new version of healthcare, and then his answer to the lack of exclusion of pre-existing conditions while still basically allowing people to buy healthcare when they get sick. His answer to that question from Brit Hume makes no sense at all, as I will discuss with you after we watch that clip together over here.
From a somewhat different angle, the angle where Rand Paul is coming from, and he's not alone in this. There are members of the House who feel the same way, and perhaps others in the Senate as well. His point is, you don't repeal and replace Obamacare here. You leave most of its key elements in place. You know, the coverage for pre-existing conditions. Young people can stay on their parents' insurance plan till age 26. The subsidies, which are a key part of Obamacare, are all left largely intact here. That this doesn't, in fact, do the job of repealing and replacing Obamacare. What do you say?
Yeah, what I tell them is look, the penalties go away. Right now, the government's forcing people to buy coverage. In fact, again, there are 6.5 million folks who are paying the $3 billion for the privilege of not purchasing that coverage. Those go away, so that's not Obamacare. Medicaid actually becomes much more flexible for states so that they can design a program that works for their citizens, as opposed to Washington telling the states what they want. That's not Obamacare. The taxes that are in place solely to build a huge government-run health care system, those go away, so that's not Obamacare. So what we're trying to do here, admittedly, is to thread a needle and make it so that, as the president says, every single American needs to be able to have access to the kind of coverage that they want. Ensuring that pre-existing illnesses are covered, ensuring that there are no lifetime caps, ensuring that individuals, again, have the kind of choices that are necessary so that the system is responsive to people, to patients, not responsive to government.
Mr. Secretary, you mentioned that the penalties for not having, and the tax penalty for not having insurance goes away, which suggests that that people, since pre-existing conditions are covered, anybody who wants to can simply wait until they're sick to buy coverage and then be covered. That obviously is an issue, since you need healthy people in the program to pay for the coverage for people who are ill. What is the incentive in this bill, if any, to get people to go ahead and purchase coverage when they are young and they feel healthy and it's a rational choice not to have it?
Well, it's a great question, and the question really is, how do you get young, healthy people to purchase coverage so that the pool includes them? And the answer is, you provide the insurance companies the opportunity to sell something to young, healthy people that they want to buy. Not that they say, the 6.5 million folks out there say, we'll write a check so that we don't have to buy what Washington tells us to buy. You provide the kind of choices, the array of choices. Before, individuals were able to purchase the kind of coverage that was actually responsive to them, fit their system, fit their lifestyle, fit their situation in life. That's the way that you get folks to buy coverage, and it's providing coverage that they want to purchase, as opposed to what the government dictates to them they've got to buy.
Senator, let me turn to the question, obviously.
So I don't know, do you think Brit Hume did a better job there of questioning the guest from the right than he did earlier, trying to talk about the cuts in Medicaid? Of course, Fox News does a better job of criticizing people from the right than from the left, and I don't think that Tom Price did a good job of assuaging the concerns you heard from Rand Paul earlier. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. The next clip, though, is also from Tom Price. This is over on CNN's State of the Union, where Dana Bash actually, I think, does a good job of pinning him down on the tax cuts for the rich issue. She takes this clip of Warren Buffett, one of the super rich, and oh, I got Sandy's distracting me. I just took a picture of Sandy during that last clip, which I will try to share with you before the end. For the Sandy fans out there, it should have depth effect according to the portrait mode on my iPhone, but we'll see if it has actual depth effect when I show it to you or when I import it. But this next clip of Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price, you'll see Dana Bash really nails him down, and He obviously does not answer the question as to how much he is personally going to benefit from the big tax cut for the rich in Trumpcare Senate version, the meaner version, as I will discuss with you after we watch that clip together here.
A different part of the plan before the Senate, and certainly what we saw in the House as well, and that is that it would slash taxes on the wealthiest Americans. Looking at the bill that came out of the House, billionaire investor Warren Buffett said that your plan would reduce his tax bill by $680,000, and he has a question for public officials that I wanted to pose to you. Let's listen.
I think it would be very interesting for the constituents of every congressman that voted for that bill to ask a question, just one question. Are you above 250 on your adjusted gross income? And if you were, how much would you have saved from what you paid last year from this bill you just passed?
So what's the answer? How much would you save under the House and Senate bills?
Well, remember that Obamacare taxes were put in place to build a whole new government program, government-run health care. When you back out of that, when you make it so that you've got a patient-centered system where patients and families and doctors are running health care and not the federal government, then that of necessity allows you to do so with not as much money. And so we believe it's absolutely vital that we decrease taxes for the American people, allow them to keep more of their hard-earned money. Dana, did you appreciate, and I don't know if your listeners do, there's 6.5 million Americans right now who are paying $3 billion in penalties, in taxes, just for the privilege of not purchasing health coverage. Can you imagine that? That's a system that isn't working for those 6.5 million. How about lowering the taxes for those 6.5 million?
And I understand that, but the question now is, when it comes to the bill that is before the United States Senate, the fact of the matter is people like you are going to get a tax cut.
Well, the fact of the matter is that those 6.5 million will no longer have to pay $3 billion in a penalty or a tax to the federal government because they're not interested in purchasing what the government wants to force them to buy. Look, this is a system right now that is run by the government, for the government, dictated by the government, and it's not responding to patients' needs. And that's what we want to get to. 28 million individuals right now uninsured, 6.5 million folks spending $3 billion in a tax penalty, premiums up, deductibles up, coverage going away. We haven't even begun to talk about the states where they're going to have counties that have no insurance issuer next year. That's not a system that works for patients. That's what we're trying to fix.
I'm not sure Warren Buffett is going to be satisfied that he got an answer to his question, but I appreciate it.
Well, I'm not sure Warren Buffett is interested. I'm not sure Warren Buffett is interested in covering those individuals in those counties that won't have insurance. What are we going to do about that? That's the key. We've got to make certain that we're looking at every single American citizen and every single individual across this land who needs coverage that they want for themselves and for their family, not that the government forces them to buy.
Well, we'll see what happens this week with the Senate and this very, very important bill that's before them. Thank you so much for your time this morning, Mr. Secretary.
So that's the Health and Human Services Secretary dodging a question from Dana Bash on CNN State of the Union. He never said how much money he is personally going to gain if this version of Trumpcare, the Senate version, the meaner version of Trumpcare, ends up being the version that passes. But given the fact that the top 1% on average get like, I think it's $57,000 or $58,000, and you heard Warren Buffett say that he's going to get $680,000, almost $1 million in a tax cut from this Trumpcare bill that takes away $800 billion in Medicaid funding from the poor and the near poor, the people who are 125% of the poverty level. And that's just insane in my mind, but you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And before I leave the criticisms from the right wing, I want to show a clip of Ron Johnson, Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin. He's another one of these right-wing senators who may oppose Trumpcare, or it actually sounds, if you listen to his discussion here with Chuck Todd on CNN, on NBC's Meet the Press this morning, it sounds more like he wants to delay the bill. And I just want to point out before I show the clip that delaying the bill is very close to killing the bill, because if they don't vote on this before July 4th and they don't make the members of the Senate stay for extended session, they're all going to go back to their districts and they're going to hear from their constituents that you're going to cut my Medicaid, you're going to take away my, I don't want the government to touch my Medicare, or whatever that used to be back in 2010. But anyway, before I continue discussing this clip, we should probably watch it together. Ron Johnson on NBC's Meet the Press with Chuck Todd this morning here.
I think your concerns probably are never going to be fully addressed in this bill. What does it take for you? At some point, you've got to decide whether to do this or not. Is the political pressure of saying, boy, if you don't do this, and you're one of the Republicans, and you've heard from President Trump, he hopes his good friends don't tank this bill. How much does that political pressure weigh on you, even though you look at this bill and you see a lot of flaws?
Chuck, the reason I left a life I loved in Oshkosh, Wisconsin here is to fix this problem. And what I find so disappointing is these bills aren't going to fix the problem. They're not addressing the root cause. They're doing the same old Washington thing, throwing more money at the problem. And, of course, we have all the inflamed rhetoric. So what I'd like to do is slow the process down, get the information, go through the problem-solving process, actually reduce these premiums that have been artificially driven up because of Obamacare mandates. So let's actually fix the problem. But in the end, I come from a manufacturing base. I will look at whatever I'm forced to vote on, and I'll ask myself, is this better tomorrow than where we are today? Is it continuous improvement? And that's what will guide my decision.
So you don't like this process, but you're not willing to be the vote to delay things, to force the process to get better?
Oh, I would like to delay the thing. There's no way we should be voting on this next week. No way. There's no way.
Are you going to work to stop it? Are you going to work to stop a vote next week?
I have a hard time believing Wisconsin constituents or even myself will have enough time to properly evaluate this for me to vote for a motion to proceed. So I've been encouraging leadership, the White House, anybody I can talk to for quite some time. Let's not rush this process. Let's have the integrity to show the American people what it is, show them the truth.
Why haven't they listened to you?
So we can actually argue against the rhetoric. Well, maybe they will.
Okay, well, we're going to find out this week. Senator Johnson, as you lamented, I'm out of time. I do wish we had more time.
So the worst line in the sand you get from Senator Ron Johnson there is probably not going to vote for it if they don't make changes. Probably. Well, that's not really a line in the sand, no red line, no ultimatum from Senator Ron Johnson there. And that kind of, in some ways, feeds the theory from the conventional wisdom I've heard on the left that at least the senators on the right it's all like a show that is kind of like what happened in the House, that they, pretend to oppose what's going to happen, but in the end they pass something, and that kind of supports what Bill Maher said in the monologue clip I showed at the very beginning, that Mitch McConnell has a plan and he's going to get this passed through the Senate, but I'm not sure that it's a really close call. I don't know if it's actually going to pass. And going beyond the Republican opposition, I want to show a couple clips about the Democrats opposing Trumpcare in its latest version before I get to the Russia topic and the bonus voting rights clip at the end. So I have two Democrats. First, the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, and then I'll have a clip of Senator Bernie Sanders, not technically a Democrat, but an independent who caucuses with the Democrats. First, Chuck Schumer talking about both the problems with Trumpcare and why Democrats haven't been involved in the process so far, and how if this bill actually does fail, then Democrats might get involved in the process, which is an interesting thought experiment or hypothetical. If this doesn't pass in the next, by Thursday of this coming week, this is what might happen according to the highest, this may be the highest ranking, the leader of the Democratic Party by some estimates, because he's the highest ranking Democrat in the U.S. Senate, Chuck Schumer, talking about Trumpcare with, this is George Stephanopoulos on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos this morning here.
Kellyanne Conway right there. She says the Democrats ought to come to the table, help pass this thing.
Well, on January 4th, they passed this reconciliation bill which said we don't want Democrats. We have sent them 10 letters saying, sit down with us. We can improve Obamacare. If you stop doing this repeal, which is Trumpcare, highly unpopular with the American people, we'll sit down with you and make it better. Even last week, I asked Mitch McConnell, let Democrats and Republicans together, all 100 of us, meet in the old Senate chamber and discuss this. No.
You think
they want to try it themselves first. If they fail, hopefully they'll come sit down. They'll stop sabotaging Obamacare and sit down with us, and we'll make Obamacare better.
Are they going to pass this bill?
I think it's 50-50. First, Democrats, we are doing everything we can to fight this bill because it's so devastating for the middle class. I think they have, at best, a 50-50 chance of passing this bill. To get 3 senators to vote no, you can say yes, you can say no. It's probably 50-50. But the bill is just devastating, and that's what's making it so hard for them to pass it. Here's what it does. It kills the middle class and gives money to the wealthy. And let's not forget one thing, George. The hard right, these 1,000 very wealthy people have such dominance in the Republican Party. They've had 2 goals for decades. 1, reduce taxes on the rich. People who make over $1 million get an average of a $57,000 tax cut. 2, destroy the social safety net for the middle class of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. This is the first step where they're doing that in the Senate bill. So that's why there's such pressure on these Republicans, this narrow group of wealthy people with power. But the American people are crying out and saying no.
But if this goes down, you call the White House the next day?
I'd call the White House the next day. I'd be happy to and say 2 things. First, stop sabotaging Obamacare. This cost-sharing proposal, which Democrats have been for and Republicans have rejected, the insurance industry itself says that's the #1 way to stabilize Obamacare. In fact, CBO said it was being stabilized until they started sabotaging it with this cost-sharing. But 2, sit down and work with us. We have ideas, you have ideas. You can't repeal Obamacare. That was proven if they lost. We'll work with you to make it better.
Let's talk about Russia. You heard Kellyanne Conway.
And I'll get to Russia in a minute, but I have one more clip on the Trumpcare debate, and that was Chuck Schumer giving sort of a hypothetical about what might happen in terms of bipartisan health care reform if Trumpcare fails to pass this week under Mitch McConnell's diabolical secret bill plan that he just revealed the bill on Thursday or Friday or of this last week, and they're going to vote on it with no hearings and very little debate, and that may happen, or maybe what Chuck Schumer talked about might happen, and Democrats will get involved. That would definitely be better, I think. And the last clip I want to show on Trumpcare is Senator Bernie Sanders also talking about the problems with Trumpcare, and it starts off with this question from Chuck Todd on CNN, on NBC's Meet the Press. Why have I said CNN instead of NBC twice today? Is that a mistake you have to drink for? I don't know. You let me know. But on NBC's Meet the Press, Chuck Todd points out that Orrin Hatch has accused Senator Bernie Sanders of using over-the-top rhetoric by saying that Trumpcare will kill people. But you notice Orrin Hatch doesn't say kill, he says murder. And I don't know if throwing people off health insurance so that they don't have coverage and they're more likely to die, that's not really murder, but it is people who are going to die based on a bad policy. And I think Bernie Sanders does a good job of discussing what that's really all about, as I will discuss with you after we watch Bernie Sanders talking to Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press for the final clip on Trumpcare, the meaner version of Republican health care in this clip.
Sanders of Vermont, he is not at all conflicted about the Republican health care bill. He is holding rallies this weekend in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio in an attempt to generate opposition to the bill, and plainly says if it passes, thousands will die. Senator Sanders joins me now from Columbus, Ohio. Senator, welcome back, sir.
Good to be with you, Chuck.
I want to first address that rhetoric. You tweeted that issue of saying that, yes, you thought people would die, and then Senator Orrin Hatch retweeted. He said, here, let us be clear, this is not trying to be overly dramatic. Thousands of people will die if the Republican health care bill becomes law. Orrin Hatch retweeted you and said, the brief time when we were not accusing those we disagree with of murder was nice while it lasted. Any regrets at using the rhetoric you used?
Chuck,
considering what Senator Hatch said.
Chuck, what the Republican proposal does is throw 23 million Americans off of health insurance. What Harvard University, what a part of Harvard University and the scientists there determined is when you throw 23 million people off of health insurance, people with cancer, people with heart disease, people with diabetes, thousands of people will die. I wish I didn't have to say it. This is not me. This is study after study making this point. It is common sense. If you have cancer and your insurance is taken away from you, there is a likelihood you will die, and certainly a likelihood that you will become much sicker than you are today. That's the facts. Unpleasant, but it's true. Second of all, while they throw 23 million people off of health insurance, while they defund Planned Parenthood, while they raise premiums for older workers, people who are in their 60s may see premiums that will be 50, 75% higher, they are going to provide some $500 billion in tax breaks to the top 2%, to the insurance companies, and to the drug companies. Is what America's supposed to be about taking away health insurance from kids with disabilities, from people with cancer, in order to give tax breaks to billionaires? That is what this entire debate is about. And one of the things that bothers me very much, Chuck, 60% of the American people, according to a recent poll, don't even know what is in this health care.
Well, I don't want to talk about that process, because I think the process here...
So I think that was the best critique of all the critiques I've shown of Trumpcare. You know, I voted for Bernie Sanders in the primaries. I haven't made any secret of my support for Bernie Sanders over Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, although I did vote for Hillary Clinton in the general election. I've admitted that, but I'm actually proud of that vote given how Donald Trump has governed so far. But that, like I said, was the last clip in the Trumpcare topic that I said I would cover here. And by the way, I got a nice super chat contribution. That's just for the live viewers. You can contribute monetary contributions that support my channel. This is from Turtle Tracks. Support for my LGBTQ viewers. I appreciate that. I try to cover the LGBTQ issues when I can, although that's not one of the topics today, but I appreciate that support from Turtle Tracks. And if you want to support me as a recorded show viewer, I do have a link down in the video description to my Patreon channel. I've noticed my videos right now, about 25% of my overall views in the last 28 days have been monetized views, and so basically a quarter of my video views have been monetized. If you're watching my video as a recorded video, you'll notice in the first 24 hours or so after the live stream, no ads, and that's when I get most of my views. That's why so few of my video views are monetized. So I'm relying on people like Turtle Tracks and my Patreon supporters to keep this an economically viable use of my time. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And now so the next topic, as I promised, I'm gonna do a few quick clips on the Russia topic. And I don't have a Bill Maher political comedy clip to start this, so instead I'm going to use Fox News bias as my political comedy. Fox News is always good for that kind of amusing look at their skewed, biased look at the news. And this is from the intro to Fox News Sunday, hosted by Britt Hume, where they looked at the news from the Russia story. There was this big Washington Post story I'll talk about how the Obama administration knew that Putin had directed this hacking of the American election, or interference in the American election. They knew about it earlier than we, like in August of 2016. And that's the news, but Fox News didn't cover that. Or Donald Trump admitting that he had no taping of James Comey. After 41 days, he finally admitted that was just a big bluff. That wasn't the big news on Fox News Sunday. No, the big news in the Fox News Sunday intro is that Donald Trump is questioning the impartiality of Robert Mueller, the special counsel, and our panel will discuss, should he recuse himself? That's the big news over on Fox News Sunday, as you can see in this 18-second clip from their introductory segment this morning here.
Plus, the president questioned special counsel Robert Mueller's ability to be impartial.
He's very, very good friends with Comey, which is very bothersome.
We'll ask our Sunday panel if Mueller needs to recuse himself from this investigation. All right now on Fox News Sunday.
So, like I said, I think that was kind of amusing that Fox News Sunday thought that was the angle to cover on the Russia story this week. That seemed to be a sort of also-ran story, not one of the two big stories. But the best coverage of one of the two big stories, the Washington Post story, I think, came from Face the Nation in their summary. But and I'm going to show both the summary and then I've edited this clip a little bit to cut out the introduction of the other panel guests and then to click to the second clip from this guy, Adam Entos, who is the Washington Post reporter who reported on this previously unknown facts of how the Obama administration learned about Putin directing the interference in the American election and then didn't really do enough about it. I think the summary on Face the Nation was better than any of the other shows, and that's at the beginning of this clip. But then they didn't really cross-examine their guest very much to find out about, you know, who are these anonymous sources, you know, what do they really know, and I'll discuss that with you after we watch that clip together here.
We're juggling two big stories today, but we begin with the investigation into Russian efforts to influence the outcome of the 2016 election. This week, Homeland Security officials told Congress that the Russians targeted voter databases in 21 states. And CBS News Justice correspondent Jeff Pegues has learned that nearly twice that showed evidence of a breach. The Washington Post this week came out with a bombshell investigation into the Obama administration's top-secret efforts to combat Russian attempts to influence the election, reporting that the administration knew as early as last August that Vladimir Putin had ordered the effort specifically to help defeat Hillary Clinton. The Obama team considered a number of responses, including a package of cyber bomb strikes that ultimately they did not use and left behind for the Trump administration. Yesterday, President Trump launched several tweets criticizing the Obama administration for inaction. He spoke about it in a Fox News interview.
Well, I just heard today for the first time that Obama knew about Russia a long time before the election, and he did nothing about it. If he had the information, why didn't he do something about it? He should have done something about it.
There's a lot to process. So his colleague, Adam Entos, who was on the team that broke the Washington Post story. Adam, so let's start with you. Lay out this story for us.
Well, the story opens with a dramatic scene, which is the delivery of this intelligence by courier to the White House. It comes with eyes-only instructions to be given to the president and 3 top advisors at that point. And in the package was intelligence from a high-level source of information that was deemed highly reliable by the CIA, describing directly Putin's order to carry out this operation and the goal of trying to help Trump and hurt Hillary Clinton. Once they read that, they were instructed to put it back in the envelope and tell the courier to take it back to Langley. That's just an example of, you know, what was being given to the president at that point. This was a CIA assessment early. This was raw intelligence, and it wasn't good enough for Obama. He instructed the intelligence community to go out and see if they can validate what the CIA was picking up. I think, you know, the fear that you know, anything they did was going to be cast as partisan was amplified when Brennan went about meeting with the Gang of Eight, as it's known, when they met
congressional leaders.
Right. When he met with the Democrats, they were alarmed by the intelligence. When they met with Paul Ryan, the Speaker, he was also alarmed by the intelligence. But when they met with Senator McConnell, he was extremely skeptical. And he raised questions about the intelligence. He thought it was being politicized. And from talking to administration officials who were part of that, that sent the White House, if anything, back to the drawing board. They were afraid that if they moved unilaterally, it would be seen as playing to Trump's public statements as a candidate. that this all was rigged in favor of Hillary Clinton.
Finally, David, to you.
So I think Face the Nation, like I said, did the best job of summarizing what was in the Washington Post story, John Dickerson at the beginning of that clip, and then they gave Adam Entos, one of the co-authors of the Washington Post story, sort of uninterrupted access to their airtime to reiterate the story. I've actually put the Washington Post story as a link down in the video description that you can read the whole story yourself. It's somewhat based on anonymous sources, and I am not so much worried about that from the Trump fake news aspect, but more from people like Glenn Greenwald, who have criticized the mainstream press and the Washington Post and others for being too obsessed with the Russia angle and too willing to accept these intelligence agencies' assessments. And you can let me know down in the comment section whether you think that might be a problem. But I actually want to show this next clip is from CNN's State of the Union. It's Dana Bash talking about how Trump has used this Washington Post story to say the Obama administration didn't do enough to respond to the Russia interference in the American elections, which is really disingenuous. And I think that Dana Bash's guest on CNN's State of the Union, Adam Schiff, the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, does a good job of coming up with the metaphor as to why Donald Trump is not the best messenger for this criticism of the Obama administration's response to Russian interference in our election. But then Adam Schiff himself does criticize the Obama administration, and I edit a second criticism from CNN's State of the Union onto the end of this clip, and I will discuss with you why I'm not so sure Adam Schiff is right about that last part after we watch that clip together here.
Obama knew about Russia a long time before the election, and he did nothing about it. But nobody wants to talk about that. If he had the information, why didn't he do something about it? He should have done something about it.
That was President Trump reacting to an explosive story in the Washington Post this week, revealing that President Obama knew months before the 2016 election that Putin was trying to influence the results. But Obama took action against Russia only after Trump won. Now, President Trump has not yet taken any measures to punish Russia for their actions, and it's unclear what exactly is being done to stop Russia from meddling in the next election. A lot of new questions for the man investigating this issue, ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, Democrat Adam Schiff, who's here with me now. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it. Congressman, I'll just start with the fact that the Democrats you are investigating, but a lot of Democrats have been using Russia as a political tool to go after President Trump and the Republicans as well. This week, as you just heard, the Washington Post reported that President Obama knew as far back as August of 2016 that Vladimir Putin was working to elect President Trump. Did Obama fail in his duty to this nation?
I think the Obama administration should have done a lot more when it became clear that not only was Russia intervening, but it was being directed at the highest levels of the Kremlin. And indeed, Senator Feinstein and I were repeatedly trying to make that case to the administration initially when they didn't want to make attribution, they didn't want to publicly talk about Russia's role. And later, after we issued our own statement, and they did attribute the conduct to Russia, I was urging that they begin then the process of sanctioning Russia, the administration talking more forcefully about what the Russians had done. I think that was a mistake, but I have to contest what President Trump is also saying, because for Donald Trump, who openly egged on the Russians to hack Hillary Clinton's emails and celebrated every release of these stolen documents, to criticize Obama now is a bit like someone knowingly receiving stolen property, blaming the police for not stopping the theft. So Donald Trump is in no position to complain here.
That may be true, but let's focus on President Obama for a minute. You say it was a mistake. How much were politics at play, meaning fear that people would say that he's getting too involved in a way that would help Hillary Clinton? And should that have been a factor at all, given the gravity of what you were seeing in the intelligence.
It was a factor, and it should not have been the most weighty factor. I think they were concerned about being perceived as interfering in the election, trying to tip the scales for Hillary Clinton. I think they were also concerned about not wanting to play into the narrative that Donald Trump was telling, that the election was going to be rigged, even though Donald Trump was talking about a completely different kind of rigging than foreign intervention. But both of those factors did not outweigh, in my view, and I argued this at the time, did not outweigh the public's need to know. The American people needed to know, and I didn't think it was enough to tell them after the election. But rather, given the seriousness of this, I think the administration needed to call out Russia earlier, needed to act to deter and punish Russia earlier, and I think that was a very serious mistake.
You mentioned, President, what would you have done? What should President Obama have done?
Well, I think what he should have done, and what I urged at the time, was he should have spoken out to the American people and said, this is what Russia is doing. Russia has better stop it. And more than that, we are going to enter in conversations right now with our European allies who have similarly been the victim of Russian hacking and interference in their elections to embark on a new round of sanctions. And I think those sanctions should have been not only imposed earlier, but far stronger than the sanctions the Obama administration would ultimately impose after the election.
So, I don't know, maybe it's because I'm LiberalViewer and I come from a liberal perspective, but I agree with Adam Schiff on his criticism of Donald Trump, but not so much on his criticism of liberal hero, former President Barack Obama. I really like that analogy or metaphor, whatever you want to call it, that Adam Schiff made of Donald Trump as someone who received stolen property, but then criticized the police for not stopping the thief. You know, that's pretty apt in terms of his criticism of Obama for not doing more to stop Russian interference in the U.S. election, when the U.S. election really helped Donald Trump. That interference in the U.S. election really helped Donald Trump. On the other hand, his idea that Obama should have done more, I mean, if you were watching my Sunday live clip roundups back during the election, it's hard for me to believe that that would have come across as anything more than a partisan interference. You know, Trump was already saying that there was rigging, even though it was a different kind of rigging. It's not like he couldn't have pivoted and said Obama was trying to throw the election to Hillary based on this fake news about the Russia. I mean, as of now, Trump has barely accepted the intelligence agencies, the deep state assessment, the 17 intelligence agencies that Russia hacked our election, interfered with our election. So what would have happened back in August, September, or even October, November if Obama had made that announcement? I don't think it would have come across as nonpartisan national security concerns. I think it would have been partisan, but I don't know. There's a good argument on the other hand that what would have happened is it would have thrown the election to Hillary Clinton, and that then you would have had Trump, and the 38% of Americans who are staunch Trump supporters would be talking about how Obama rigged the election for Hillary Clinton, and they'd be, you know, big obstructionists, and they'd be, you know, coming to town hall meetings, and Trump TV would be publicizing how the Hillary Clinton administration was doing all these bad things. But as a Democrat, we'd be in a much better position. We'd have a more liberal majority on the Supreme Court. We'd have a Democrat in control of the presidency, the executive branch. I don't know. If that's true, we would definitely be much better off if Obama had come out more strongly like Adam Schiff says he should have. I don't know if that's how it would have turned out, though. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And before I leave the topic of Russia and the Russia scandal, Russiagate, as maybe it should be called, I don't know. I promise you one more Kellyanne Conway clip. This is Kellyanne Conway responding to some good cross-examination from George Stephanopoulos as to why it is that Donald Trump claimed first he claimed that there might be tapes or recordings of James Comey's conversations with Donald Trump in the Oval Office when they were all alone. And then when 41 days later, when he said, oh, I don't have any recordings, I don't know if there are any recordings, but at the beginning of that two-part tweet, he said, you know, there's all this surveillance, so maybe there are recordings. And George Stephanopoulos picked up on that and cross-examined Kellyanne Conway on that, and she tried to change the subject so many times that by the end of this clip, George Stephanopoulos can't even remember what the question was, as I will discuss with you after we watch that clip together here.
Worse, but I will ask Senator Schumer about that. But I want to move on right now. We also saw the president for the first time this week finally concede that he did not actually tape James Comey. Here's what the president's tweet said. He said, with all the recently reported electronic surveillance, intercepts, unmasking, and illegal leaking of information, I have no idea whether there are tapes or recordings of my conversations with James Comey, but I did not make and do not have any such recording. So that's clear right now. The president said he did not tape James Comey. But I'm confused by the top part of that tape. Does the president have any evidence at all that his personal conversations were somehow taped? And has he asked the intelligence agencies for that evidence?
In that tweet, the president is making clear, as he often does on social media, George, that he's leaving over the possibility that it could have happened. Why do we know this? Because, you know, the conversations he had with the heads of Mexico and Australia were leaked.
But Kellyanne, that's why I wonder, he's leaving open the possibility. He's the president of the United States. He can ask the intelligence agencies. He can ask the National Security Agency. He can ask the CIA. Has he asked them? Does he have any evidence?
So the president has made very clear, as Director Pompeo did on a different network this weekend, that these leaks coming from the intelligence and security communities are impeding
Kellyanne, that's not
progress.
what I asked.
But
I asked if he has any evidence that he was taped.
He is saying to you, well, first of all, we have evidence that there are leaks, George. I mean, they go right to the media. We have evidence that Jim Comey himself wanted to leak a confidential conversation or three with the president, gave it to a private citizen to leak to the New York Times, trying to spur a special counsel. It's all the same.
Has the president asked the intelligence agencies if they have any tapes of his conversations? Does he know if they have that? Does he have any evidence to back up that suggestion that he put out in the tweet?
I'm not going to comment on his conversations with his intelligence communities. Do you have any evidence of Russia collusion? Because Adam Schiff doesn't, Jay Johnson doesn't, Jim Comey doesn't. I mean, what are we talking about here with this never-ending Russian discussion? Now because they couldn't find collusion, now because it's the Obama administration that was responsible for doing absolutely nothing from August to January with the knowledge that Russia was hacking into our election. They did absolutely nothing. They're responsible for this. Nobody has any evidence of collusion. Nobody has any evidence that the president was under investigation for this, and now we're going to move on to hacking. I have a question for the Obama administration. Why did you, quote, choke in the name of one of your senior administration officials? Why did you do nothing? Why didn't you inform candidate Trump? I know you thought Hillary would win, but how could you not reveal important information about Russia hacking? When the president found out about it in January as president-elect, he said it was a disgrace. He believes Russia was behind it, but that he thinks other people hacked too.
Well,
I think the previous administration has a lot of questions to answer, given this Russian obsession by everyone.
Perhaps they do, but the White House did it. The intelligence agencies in October actually did reveal that Russia had been involved in the election, and President Trump consistently has dismissed that. It finally appears that for the first time this week he conceded that the Russians did interfere in the election. The big question now is for President Trump, what is he going to do?
So you saw by the end of that clip, George Stephanopoulos has forgotten his original question, or maybe just given up on it and had moved to the whole Russian interference question and had given up on the idea as to why doesn't Donald Trump find out if there are recordings of his secret or one-on-one conversations with FBI Director James Comey in the Oval Office. If some other, if the NSA or the CIA or whoever is recording conversations that Trump and Comey have when they're by themselves in the Oval Office, Trump should probably find that out. And you saw Kellyanne Conway did not answer that question. She just dodged it. She talked about leaks and not surveillance, which is what George Stephanopoulos was talking about. But then she talked about, where's the evidence of collusion? And she just changed the subject so many times that by the end there you saw George Stephanopoulos had kind of forgotten what the original question was. And that's basically classic Kellyanne Conway, which is what I promised when I showed that previous Kellyanne Conway clip where she was just sort of sticking to her fairly weak talking points, trying to ignore the actual reality about Medicaid cuts. And anyway, that's the last clip on the Russia topic. It was a much shorter topic than the Trumpcare topic. But before I leave you, I have one final clip, the bonus voting rights clip I promised you, and then I actually have that close-up of Sandy that I will show at the end before I end the broadcast that I took a little earlier. Sandy's showing up to watch the clips as my live studio audience here. But first, this next clip on voting rights could actually be more consequential than any of the other topics discussed in terms of the Democrats taking back the House of Representatives. You may know that Democrats are actually getting more votes for members of the House of Representatives than the Republicans, but they're not winning more seats. And you can sort of excuse the Electoral College giving Donald Trump the presidency, even though Hillary Clinton got more votes, because that's the way it was set up in the Constitution of the United States. This is my ACLU version that has some good know your rights with the police stuff at the end. But in the Constitution, you can understand why states with very few people but a lot of land, they seem to get as many votes as states with a lot of people but not as much land. It should be one person, one vote in some ways, but not in the Electoral College, not in the U.S. Senate, but in the House of Representatives. That's supposed to be the Democratic part of the legislature. It's supposed to be one person, one vote, but because of partisan gerrymandering, it hasn't turned out that way. And over on AM Joy, a program I watch on Saturday and more recently on Sunday mornings, even though I'm creating the show, I still find it very informative and like to watch it. And on AM Joy, they had ACLU attorney Dale Ho on to explain this partisan gerrymandering case that's up in front of the Supreme Court in the next term, and how it may be really consequential in terms of the Democrats taking back the House of Representatives, as I will discuss with you after we watch that final clip for tonight here.
Republicans hold 55% of the seats in the House of Representatives, even though Republican candidates only won 49% of the votes cast in November. And their electoral advantage is likely to continue. According to Fair Vote, even if voters nationwide went exactly 50-50 for Republicans and Democrats in 2018, Republicans would still win 237 seats to the Democrats' 198, keeping that shiny gavel in Paul Ryan's hands. That is thanks in part to partisan gerrymandering. But now the Supreme Court is set to hear a case that could potentially stop political parties from redrawing district lines to guarantee seats for their own candidates. Or the court could make things even worse. Joining me now to explain is Dale Ho, director of the ACLU's Voting Rights Project. Thank you, Dale, for being here. So first, explain the case that's going before the Supreme Court.
So this is a case challenging the redistricting maps in Wisconsin. You mentioned the disparity between the national vote and representation in Congress. Well, Wisconsin is a very extreme case. In Wisconsin, Republicans got about 49% of seats in the of votes for the state legislature in 2012. They got 60% of the seats, so a massive disparity. But get this. In 2014, a few years later, Republicans actually got a majority of the votes, but they got almost the exact same percentage of seats. So the precise number of votes ended up not really mattering. Wow. Right? The game was essentially rigged. Yeah. And the Republicans were basically locked into the same percentage majority in the legislature.
So what is the argument on the other side as to why this kind of gerrymandering should be allowed to continue?
Well, the other side says that part of the reason for this is that Democrats tend to live in tightly clustered urban areas, and there's some truth to that. The other side also argues that partisanship is just a part of the process. And to be fair, partisanship has always been a part of the redistricting process to some extent, right? The question is, how much is too much? Because the Supreme Court has always said that You can do some of this,
yeah.
But at some point you get to a point where it's so extreme that maybe one party just gets locked into power. And Nick Stephanopoulos, who's a professor at the University of Chicago on the plaintiff's legal team in this case, has studied this. And what he found was we have the most extreme partisan gerrymandering in our nation's history right now.
Yeah, and basically you essentially said that the votes don't really matter. When people say their votes don't count, in this sense, they kind of don't. The other argument that you hear.
And it's really true. They're under this really partisan gerrymandering. A lot of people's votes are wasted. And it's because now they can use computers to go precinct by precinct and pick the voter. It's, you know, it's kind of like a Yakov Smirnoff vote. I saw someone at the beginning. I don't think I got that saved in the save comments from my live viewers, but it's something like, in Soviet Russia, president elects you. It's like, in Soviet Russia, Congress chooses its voters instead of voters chooses its Congress, or whatever. Voters choose their Congress, and that's kind of what this partisan gerrymandering is they go through and use computers precinct by precinct to pick, so that like all the Republicans are in safe districts where they get like maybe 55% of the vote, and then they cram all the Democrats into 1 or 2 or 3 districts where Democrats get like 70, 80, 90% of the vote, but that's like wasted votes because you only need 51% to win, and then there's like 30% or 40% of the vote that's wasted and should be in other districts, and I don't know. That's why the Democrats can win a majority of the votes, but not a majority of the seats, and it's really sad. There are nonpartisan ways to redistrict. In California, we passed a ballot initiative that was actually effective for once, and I think we have fairly nonpartisan redistricting here, and maybe if the Supreme Court rules against the Wisconsin plan, then it'll turn out better. Anyway, that could be really consequential in terms of the House of Representatives being elected more democratically and Democrats having more of a chance to win seats. Like I said, that's the last clip, though I did promise a close-up of Sandy here before I finish the show. Here's the Sandy close-up. Let me see if I can import it and show it. Ooh, come on, import Sandy clip. Or it's not a clip, it's actually just a still image. Come on, here it is. So for the Sandy fans out there, that's to finish the show. I appreciate the 200 or so live viewers who showed up. My one super chat contribution. If you want to help support the show, like I said, there is a link down in the video description to become one of my patrons on Patreon. I will be back next week as usual, and maybe I'll have time to put together an edited, produced video this week. I know people have been asking for that. I almost did a couple Fox News bias videos this last week because Fox News has been so biased, but didn't really have the time. Maybe it'll happen this week. If not, or even if it does happen, I will be back next Sunday with another edition of Liberal Viewer Sunday live clip roundup. And until then, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.